Welcome to Buzz Around the Globe. French police arrested dozens of people on Wednesday as tensions escalated to new levels at protests by farmers in search of better conditions that have spread to other European countries. Defying warnings by the authorities, some farmers converged on the Rungis wholesale market outside of Paris, where almost 80 people were arrested when some individuals penetrated the complex. Meanwhile, angry farmers on the Paris to Brussels highway blocked the road with an equal measure of defiance and desperation, warning European Commission Ursula von der Leyen not to ignore farmers' concerns for better prices and less bureaucracy. The European Union is holding a summit on Thursday, and von der Leyen, or any other EU leader in attendance, can only disregard the plight of farming at their peril. Here's why European farmers are taking their anger to the streets. World War II had spread hunger on a bountiful continent. When the war ended, Western European leaders knew that the way to people's hearts was through their stomachs, so farming became a profession that stood at the cradle of what is now the EU. Agriculture was promoted and heavily subsidized to eradicate any thought of famine. Because of it, many family farmers escaped poverty. Some major landowners turned into global food giants. So what went wrong? Today's harvest for small and family farmers doesn't look like anything which was sown then, with all too many facing financial plight or worse. Instead of a benefactor, the EU is now seen as the enemy for many, aloof in an ivory tower, imposing bureaucratic rules on small-time farmers, while leaders are seen happily relaxing import restrictions for global farming powerhouses, or the likes of wartime Ukraine. The same anti-EU message can be seen from Lithuania and Belgium to France, Spain and Italy. The farmers of Europe say, it's the multinational corporations that rule Europe. That's why they are all in the middle of the road. The vision of EU farming from early on was economy of scale, bigger farms, bigger holdings, setting standard rules across borders. And as long as subsidies were aplenty, complaints were contained. Instead of hunger, there was waste with butter mountains and wine lakes created, because farm produce was paid for regardless of customer demand. But there quickly was an undercurrent of unease between farmers who lived by the fickleness of seasons and climate, and EU officials who had rulers and calculators at the ready. Every revision of the EU's so-called Common Agricultural Policy stirred grumblings, as small farmers felt ever more alienated from new policies, but were forced to adapt if they wanted to survive. In 1971, 100,000 farmers converged on EU headquarters in Brussels, and during a violent protest, one person died and dozens were injured. Then pollution, much from industry, but some from farming itself, also started to play tricks on them over the past few decades. Because of farming, nitrates were seeping into the earth, and cattle pumped methane into the skies. Again, more rules, involving more costs, were imposed on farmers, and widened the gap further between the pastures and political offices. As if there weren't enough problems from within, increasing globalization opened doors to ever more, and cheaper, imports from places like New Zealand and Chile. People feel they have to farm with their hands tied behind their back. When they are faced with all kinds of stringent, expensive rules, importers don't necessarily have to abide by those same regulations and make it much easier to undercut prices. Over the past 2 years, problems reached a critical mass for farmers. Unprecedented droughts, fires and floods blamed on climate change lay waste to crops. The COVID-19 pandemic hit the economy. Russia's war in Ukraine sent energy prices sky high. There was runaway inflation, with farm produce often failing to keep pace. Climate impact is clear by this example. Southern Spain, that some water reservoirs stood at only 4% capacity. Wildfires wiped out about 20% of Greek annual farm revenue. The fact is that incomes for the farmers are getting lower. One thing is working in favor of the farmers. The EU has parliamentary elections across the bloc in June, so this is a golden opportunity. The continent is struggling with threats to democracy, and the EU in particular with inroads of the far right into the political mainstream. Hard-right politicians are seen at many farm protests, and the generations-old link between farmers and the conservative traditional parties are under strain. So things are moving. On Wednesday, the European Commission made 2 key proposals, one to shield EU farmers from cheap Ukrainian imports, and one to sidestep an environmental measure. On Tuesday, France came with promises of help, from emergency cash aid to controls on imported food. President Emmanuel Macron has promised to stop a trade deal with South American nations if it hurts farmers too much. Compared to the violent clashes of 1971, these protests are handled with kid gloves. In Belgium, Authorities even let a fries stand set up shop on a main highway that farmers had blocked to keep them well fed. Do tell us what you think about this video in comments section, and for more news updates, subscribe to India Today.